Everybody, and welcome to our Saturday talks again. And this is the last one in quite a long and wonderful series. There is going to be a new program which starts on January the 9th, and Chris Gilchrist is doing that talk. And I can't remember the title, but it's a neat sort of cryptic one. So you'll get more information about that, and they'll be carrying on. So this morning we've got Fran Warren, who will be known to some of you because she's been in Samatha since the 70s in Manchester, which was such an important period in the development of Samatha when Lance Cousins was teaching there, and the classes began, and many of us encountered Samatha at that time. So Fran has been very fully involved in Samatha. She's one of the trustees and is now living in London, where she's taken lots of classes as well. She was the first one in the first management committee at Green Street when it was considered necessary to have a proper committee to run all the practical side of things. And Fran was a first there, and she was also one of the first sewers. So I think she's a pioneer in Samatha, and just shows you the number of things one can do to help Samatha along, you know, by supporting it in those different ways. So Fran's talk is called In This Fathom Long Body, and that reminds me of Shakespeare, though it may be from one of the Suttas. So I'm going to pass over to Fran now, and to start our talk for us. Okay, Fran.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks for the introduction, and thank you for the opportunity to give a Dharma talk. So I wanted to begin. I'll share a slide. We won't have lots of slides, but just to begin with. Is that visible?
Yeah, lovely.
Great. And so the title, it came quite spontaneously when I was asked if I'd give a talk, and then I thought, oh, what have I done? Because this is such a long and deep and big subject. But I wanted just to begin by just looking at that phrase, that in this fathom long body, with its perceptions and thoughts, there is the world, the origin of the world, the sensation of the world, and the path leading to the sensation of the world. Such an evocative phrase. And in fact, appetite has just been mentioned, but I heard it first must have been about 45 years ago, from Lance Cousins. It was, he recited it either during a practice week or a sutta group, you know, as he was wont to do. He would sometimes have short bits that he would say. And I certainly didn't understand what it meant, but it was incredibly powerful. And made me, that power of it has stayed with me, I guess. And I wanted to consider why it's so powerful. I think I can recollect it quite clearly that certainly at that time, it was the idea, it was in this body. You know, it wasn't up there, it wasn't over there, it wasn't outside, it was sort of inside. But also the very phrase, this fathom long body, was something that was so evocative. It was something over time. It was something that extends, and it's the whole body. It isn't just one part of it, one moment of mind, or one preoccupation at a particular time or a period of our lives, but it has it has a sense of a longer view, a deeper view. I think it also had a sense of, there's a sense of kind of peacefulness from it in a funny way. It's sort of completion, that there is a world, there's the origin of it, and cessation of it. And one can have a feeling of that completeness and peacefulness from it. Perhaps that sense of activity that can be freed. I think those are some of the reasons. It certainly carried a very strong sense of it's here in this life that we lead, whatever that life is, that's where the world arises. We can't deal with another world. The world is here, and it's what we do with it and how we create that world and how we act and think during that. So I decided now, all these years later, that I ought to look and see where this came from. Where did this short, very evocative phrase come from? And it comes from this Rahitasa Sutta, which is a very short sutta. And I'm just going to read a little bit about it. Quite fascinating. And I've never come across it before. I never looked at it. And it arises in a couple of suttas, because there's another sutta in this collection where Ananda tells this story. But in this particular sutta, and I've given from which Nikaya it's from, Vertissa, who's a deva, so from the god realm, he goes to Savatthi and Jeta Grove where the Buddha is, and he bows and so forth. And then he asks the Buddha a question, and it's a fascinating question. And he says, is it possible, Lord, by traveling to know or see or reach a far end of the world where one doesn't take birth, age, die, pass away, or reappear? So he's talking about traveling. And the Buddha says to him, I tell you, my friend, it isn't possible by traveling to know or see or reach a far end of the world, one where it doesn't take birth, age, die, pass away, or reappear. And Rahitissa is really happy about that. And he said, that's amazing, because I tell you, friend, addressing the Buddha, that it isn't possible by traveling to know these things. And then he recounts his own story. And he says, I was once a seer, someone possessed with psychic powers, a student of someone called Boja. And then he just describes what he did. He was a powerful skywalker. This is in the translation. My speed was as fast as that of a strong archer, well trained, a practiced hand, a practiced sharpshooter, stretched as far as shooting a light arrow across the shadow of a palm tree. My stride stretched as far as the east sea is from the west. To me, endowed with such speed, such a stride, there came the desire. I will go travelling to the end of the world. I, with a 100-year life, a 100-year lifespan, spent 100 years travelling. And he then inserts a phrase, apart from the time spent on eating, drinking, chewing, and tasting, urinating and defecating, and sleeping to fight off weariness, he travelled, but without reaching the end of the world. I died along the way. So it's amazing, Lord, and astounding that I do tell you that it isn't possible to travel. And then the really interesting, the response to this. So the Buddha responds and says, yes, I tell you, friend, that it isn't possible by travelling to know or see or reach the end of the world. And then it says this, but at the same time, I tell you, there is no making an end of suffering and stress without reaching the end of the world. Yet it is within this fathom long body, with its perceptions and intellect, that I declare that there is the world, the origin of the world, and the way, the cessation of the world, and the path leading to the end of the world. And that's very powerful sort of idea of somebody that has attained a lot of experience, skill, and comes to that point of recognizing that it's not out there that realization can occur. Now, obviously, in one way, this phrase, it's encompassing lots of things that we know, the Four Noble Truths, the idea of the path, the idea of dependent origination, of being born, of craving, of birth contact by the nature of having body and having mind and contact and feeling, that we get caught up in this world, in this body. But I also wanted to think about it from the point of view of Samatha practice, and the way that as practitioners, based on the Anapanasati Sutta that the Buddha taught and practiced, those 16 stages of the counting, the following, the touching, the settling, the rupa, the arupa, that in that practice, right from the beginning of that practice, where we're engaged with the in and the out breath, and over time, getting used to, getting accustomed to, cultivating those breaths, that there's, I think, part of the power of this in relationship to doing the practice was the sense of that this is an embodied practice. It is within this fathom long body. And over the years, the way in which we refine the breath and get used to it, so that we know what it is. And through that development of mindfulness, we can see how the world arises. We can see the thoughts, the feelings, the emotions, and we can see them go. And there was something very important about that embodiment in ourselves, and the way that, if we think about it, we have a very deep understanding through the practice in the body, Now, this has come up in quite a few contexts, interestingly, in different talks recently, of the way in which there is something about the practice cultivated, made much of, on a daily basis, the way that we experience the body, the way that we experience mindfulness, the body perception, thoughts, and that this isn't something that we put effort in to develop that, but it's also something that then becomes there and becomes kind of embodied. And often this sutta is referred to as an insight sutta. And of course, it is, because it's referring to the way in which the path, the way in which our involvement with the world, we see certain things, we choose at certain times not to follow that. It also, in thinking about this and reading that sutta, of course, it reminded me a lot of what we've seen recently, of that dependent origination, of this world here that goes round and round. It arises, we follow it, it ceases, whether that's in the moment or whether you see it over a lifetime. This is what you're seeing here. Well, maybe not very clearly, but is the it is the dependent origination as it is normally given, but then also the transcendental, that the way in which, as that very short phrase describes, the way in which there may be moments where we break that cycle and move up. And that's also hadn't actually, it's just occurred to me looking at this because of talking about the body. Actually, this is quite a good image of the body. The feeling of the body, whether you see it as a base, the circle as the kind of base through of the body going up, but also the movement there. It is a form of body. And of course, in talking about, as that sort of does, that's about the world. What a big concept the world is. But it's pointing in the direction that the world begins inside, in us, in this body. And that's how we negotiate the world. And of course, as lay people, we're living in the world and we're doing lots of things in the world that through the practice and being aware of ourselves in the in and the out breath, the way that what we do in cultivating the practice is connected to the world, to that bigger world. In some of there is another translation of this particular sutta where it talks about the cosmos. So instead of world, it's cosmos, which also is very evocative. But I decided to stay with the world there. So it encompasses the Dharma. It encompasses the the Fourfold Noble Path. And this image that I selected here for this talk, again, quite spontaneously kind of found. And it's not related to this particular sutta. It's just an image, but it seemed to have a resonance with that phrasing of this fathom long body, with perceptions and thoughts, the origin, sensation. And I think why it was such a powerful image for me in looking at it through this kind of perspective of that particular teaching was the way that it's connected to the world, that the uprightness of this body, you know, from the whole of the body, the fathom long, from the ground up to the top of the head, and the way that this is connected to the world around us. We live within the world. We both on a daily basis in terms of eating, navigating life, family, and all that is in this fathom long body as well. And it's with that richness that as lay people, the practice can develop and have a sense for moments of being just a little bit freer from that being caught in that cycle of arising and ceasing, and seeing that and actually having equanimity towards that, indeed having joy towards that it is the nature of. So it was appealing because the practice isn't separate from the world. And all of our perceptions over years that are there, and over time of practice, the way in which some of those we'll see quite clearly as certain views that we've held, but with the seeing of that, they bind us less. And it's gradual, and it's a gradual path. And that image, for me, resonated with that. Now, what I would like us to do, actually, is to do a practice. To do a practice with that sense of this fathom long body, and then we'll say a few more things afterwards, and maybe we can see what the response, what thoughts have arisen. And actually, this is a practice that a couple of people have done recently in very different kind of contexts, but I think it carries this sense of what we're doing here and talking about. So it's a practice where we'll actually do all stages of the practice, but really for quite a short sense of time, or quite a short period of time. May have a sense of longer time, but and I'll give the instructions, and what we'll be doing is if you like, going up and down columns, going up and down this fathom long body, beginning, with the counting, going down to the shortest, and then moving across to the following, the shortest. So it's interlinked and returning. So it's all of this fathom long body that is involved in this. The longest breath to the shortest breath, the shortest to the longest breath. I'll give instruction, but does that make sense? The columns? No? Good. I'll take that. So, so if we will practice for probably about sort of 25 minutes. Yeah. So if we just get into a posture that one feels comfortable with. And just closing the eyes and having a sense of this fathom long body from our feet on the ground, just the space and the extent of the body as we just lightly run up the body to the top of the head, to that sort of top knot or flame. Just feeling the extent of the body. Where's the body's boundary? And then just gently running back, sense of the body running back down. Then we'll begin the practice. We'll be spending just a few minutes on each stage. So beginning with establishing what's the most comfortable, longest breath for this moment with our bodies. The longest of counting. change to the longer of counting. Change to the shorter counting. Change to the shortest counting. Change to the shortest of following. Change to the shorter of following. Change to the longer of following. Change to the longest of following. Change to the longest of touching. Change to the longer of touching. Change to the shorter of touching. Change to the shortest of touching. Change to the shortest of settling. Change to the shorter of settling. Change to the longer of settling. Change to the longest of settling. Change to the longest of touching. Change to the longest of following. Return to the longest of counting. Then just let the breath go to wherever length it wants to go. And just see what sense of the body is there. How does this body feel? What's the extent of this body? Just finish by wishing ourselves well-being and freedom from suffering. And wishing others well-being and freedom from suffering. Wherever they may be. after we finish the practice. Maybe, although not consciously, maybe because of some of the kind of restrictions that are on us, physically at the moment, that we aren't able to travel as we may wish to, in that way. But that sense that we can travel in other ways through the body and through the practice. Anyway, open. I'd be very interested to know what people's feeling about that, or thoughts that arose about this Fathom Long Body.
Thank you, Fran. That was really
So
interesting. What struck me, particularly in that practice, what came to mind was that there seems to be was like a massive difference between the view we have of the body and maybe like the image we have of ourselves as being this kind of solid thing that doesn't really, well, changes, but quite slowly. And our actual subjective experience, as in the practice just then, which is completely different. It feels like it's actually something that's constantly changing, and it's like a sort of massive sensations and energies and things, rather than this kind of solid blob we think of ourselves as being. And it just sort of struck me really, and seemed both quite amazing and also rather puzzling that there's such a difference.
Yes, we think of ourselves as such bounded selves, even though we know we're not when we're in daily sort of interaction, and it becomes very strong in the practice, that sense of that body, that being, and the body, and by body it's all of the world of the body. And I think that's something of that quality of that phrase that had for me, the sense of that it's in the Fathom Long Body now that is the coming together, the in-breath, the out-breath, the inside and the outside. And it isn't quite bounded how we think, which is actually really, I mean, what was the feeling that went with that for you?
It was very freeing, especially that sense of there not being like a sort of limit in a way, there not being a boundary, that actually, particularly with the breath, you notice it's something that you're bringing in from outside. And I suppose everything about the body, we haven't made it ourselves, it's all a result of things that have come from elsewhere. So it felt like, it felt more, the more unbounded it felt, the more it felt kind of free, and as it should be almost.
yeah, that's that. Yeah, that freeing quality. Yeah.
Am I on, Veronica?
Yes, you are. Yeah, we can hear you now. Thank you.
Well, first of all, lovely, Fran. Thanks so much. Really enjoyed it. Lovely talk. And also enjoyed seeing the artworks behind you, which I also noticed. Yeah, I love that. Yes, I mean, a couple of things. What Sarah was saying about the boundaries, I mean, I think of that, reminded me of like Qigong and Tai Chi, where we have this energy field around us. So we're certainly not boundaried in our solid bodies. We have if you've ever done that kind of work, you become very aware of this energy field around you. And, then also quantum physics, of course, where we're all just a bunch of dancing molecules. There's no solidity anywhere. But then the other thing that occurred to me in your talk was about the, if anyone's familiar with the writer Hermann Hesse, there was a book called Narcissus and Goldmund, which is about two people. One of them chose to stay in a monastic life, not moving. They were friends. And then the other one, I think it was Goldman, went traveling, did everything worldly you could possibly imagine. And then at the end, they both came to the same place in a way. One through going to the limits of worldliness and traveling the world and having every experience, and the other one by staying put and meditating and being in a monastery or wherever he was. So that reminded me of that, you know, that the traveling to the ends of the universe, either way you can find, you know, freedom, enlightenment, if you like. They're both paths.
Yeah, I thought that was very interesting in that text, the way that obviously Rahatissa at the beginning was thinking, oh, great, you know, the Buddha kind of agrees with me that it's not in travelling to the end of the world. And then that rather lovely inversion, of course you travel to the end of the world in another way, because it's through the body and not necessarily the geographic, yeah, there. And it's intriguing, isn't it? But I think it's also that one gets in the practice, especially doing all of those lengths and stages at once quite relatively quickly, is that sense of actually how much our body knows through, you know, years of practice. And sometimes it may just be being aware of the body that awakens something, you know, and being at home with that. Yeah. Yeah, very interesting, those two counterparts, inside, outside, in the middle.
Tony waving there. It is Tony, isn't it? And somebody else as well, but Tony, okay. Tony?
Just like to ask for a brief clarification, because your title is Fathom Long, and when the text appeared on the screen, it was Fathom Less.
Oh, well, that is an error. It should have been Fathom Long. Well, interesting.
It is interesting, yes.
Yes. Maybe it becomes fathomless, but it's fathom long. Okay. Yeah.
Good slip up.
One of the things that I forgot to mention in that opening to that sutta, which is rather kind of lovely, is that Rahatissa, when he comes to meet the Buddha in the Jeta Grove, he's described as the son of a deva in the far extreme of the night, his extreme radiance lighting up the entirety of the Jeta's Grove. That he comes to the Buddha and that's how. So that's also that sense of that quality of being that's embodied there, that comes to see and understand something. Yeah.
Yeah, I guess the point about you can't travel to the end of the world is however far or fast or long you travel, you will be taking your world with you, your experience world. You can't travel beyond yourself in that sense. Certainly the world in the quote is your kind of experience world, the world which switches on each morning when you get up, either in a good mood or a bad mood. If you get up in a bad mood, the world is an irritating place, so to speak. But actually, in the text, the Pali for the body, it's not the normal word for body, kaya, it's kaliwara, which means something like the carcass. And I just looked it up in the most recent Pali dictionary. It says the body, a dead body, a corpse. So I think carcass is a good word. In this sweaty old body, with its perception and mind, all this stuff happens, you know, the world of your lived experience, which might be tight and small, or light and joyful and wide. And so your experience body can feel very, very big, unlimited, even though it's within this sweaty old carcass. And there's a potential through practice for the world to stop.
Yeah, that's absolutely right, and that's why often commentary. I found a few commentaries on this particular sutta, and the use of the word carcass and the way it's within insight tradition, it's regarded vipassana as very highly, but so I was also interested in why it was that it has such a strong kind of feeling of something within a anapanasati samatha vipassana, and it is precisely that bringing together of in the body both the knowledge, yes, of its changing and eventually it's decaying, but also with the sense of the breath in the body as a vehicle, the in-breath, the out-breath. So I didn't want to go down that line, you know.
Well, the breath helps tune you to the other worlds, the whole set of other worlds. Yeah. Yeah.
Well, funnily enough, I had a question which I think has just been answered, but I also wanted to say thanks to Fran for the fascinating talk and the lovely practice. But yeah, it was specifically about the cessation of the world. In the sutta, it sounded to me slightly. I mean, you wouldn't normally think of the cessation of the world as being a good thing necessarily. You know, it's a kind of bit like "stop the world, I want to get off." You know. I think Buddhism can sometimes seem rather negative like that, at first sight at least. You know, it sounds as though it's saying in misery, you know, the whole of existence is permeated with misery and the best thing you can do is sort of stop it. But I liked what Peter said about, you know, you can reach a point at which things stop, you know. I just thought it was a slightly odd choice of expression to talk about the cessation of the world, because it sounds as though perhaps it's really talking about enlightenment or something, and I was a little bit perplexed by it. But anyway, if anyone has any more to say about that, I'd be very interested to hear it. So thank you.
You might say, "Stop the world, there's no I to get off."
Yes, but I also think that cessation works at various levels. You're undoubtedly right that at one point it would be enlightenment, where there's nothing to continue. But I think in practice and in daily life, we can have that experience where that holding to the world at a particular moment, actually it just stops for a moment. It's just not holding to it. It's not got any stickiness. And even if that's just for really just like a moment when you open your eyes, or a moment when you feel that unbounded sort of body, it's freeing actually. So I'm just saying it may not have the connotation of misery that we sometimes associate with it, because that's with I don't want to not exist. Yeah.
thank you. No, I had a sort of moment of feeling things had sort of stopped at the end of the practice just now. So yes, you've shown us it's possible. Thank you.
Just with reference to what Guy was saying, it doesn't have to be, and what Fran responded, it doesn't just have to be nirvana that frees us from the world. I mean, in jhana, that's when you're free from the world as well, and free from the body, you know, when you're in jhana, which is why it's, the jhanas are blissful states, you know, because that's exactly what happens. You're free from the world and you're free from your body for that period of time, you know. So
hi Fran, thank you very much. That practice was quite interesting. I haven't done it for a little while. I guess one thing that got clarified for me was that normally when we think about expansion, it's outwards, and unboundedness is outwards. So just in the way people are talking about it, is upwards and outwards to infinity. So our kind of minds, the metaphor of going outwards to infinity, sort of it's easy to kind of connect with, and that practice invites that. But there was something about doing the 16 stages that initially gave me a sense of like nested bodies inside. Like the longer length is nested within the longest length, the shorter length is nested within the longer length, and so on. And it just, for a moment, I had a sense, or for a while, I had a sense of an infinity which is going inwards as opposed to outwards. And that, which is much less, perhaps, sort of easy for us to imagine, because we have a kind of perception of space as somehow coming to a limit inwards. You can only go so far inwards, but actually within the experience of the practice, the infinity inwards exists, just as the infinity outwards. And then that was very freeing, actually, a sense of an infinity outwards and infinity inwards, and just sort of almost like a kind of a membrane that exists between the two, which is something about the momentary I that exists, that is experiencing, or something like that. But something very interesting about allowing that sense of boundlessness and infinity to going inward as well as outward.
I think it's quite interesting when you close your eyes to practice and just have that sense of how deep is the body? How deep?
I'd like to take the opportunity to speak as well, because my response was very similar to Charles. The practice I found very much that same way. It was very much an inward journey, and there seemed to be a sense of limitlessness about that possibility in the practice. And using the different breaths in one, it was, I think it's some time since I've had that contrast, and realizing, you know, the benefit of this practice we've got with all that, those stages, and the different feeling of the shorter and the deep longer. And I had a sense of inward. But on top of that, or as well as that, that image of the transcendent arising, I think you said it's rather like a body. And for some reason, a sense of that was in the practice too, you know, as if there was a firm base somehow, you know, it was kind of, I was aware of very much sort of on the ground, but it felt as though that my head was much lighter, you know, and much, not open so much as, again, a kind of limitless feel, lighter. And so I found that helpful. It was a way of feeling, and also different points as well. There's little Samatha logos on that diagram, and one seems to be in the belly, one in the heart, and one in the head. But I just saw more in it, and I found it a really interesting practice, which I'd like to kind of conjure up again somehow. And as a final little point, that image has been used by a couple of people actually, and it was in a newsletter. So there may be somebody there out there that actually drew it and wrote it, and if so, reveal yourself, because it seems to be a motif that keeps coming back. But thank you very much for that practice. I discovered something in it which was very good. Yash there. Okay, Yash. Right. Thanks, Fran.
I was thinking when you described the sutta, the teaching he's given, the teaching that's given is to a very interesting being, or if that represents us, ourselves in a very interesting state, because he's incredibly bright, brightens the darkness, and then his karma is that he's already had this great ambition, really, to get to the end of the world, an ambition which he sacrificed his life in doing, and did nothing else except those very interesting, necessary things you need to do. So it's a very important, very great being. Is it Rohatissa? And then the Buddha's teaching is one that puts into, he wants the Buddha's answer, and the Buddha's answer is the one he gets, but then it's put into balance, so that there is both no end of the world and there is an end of the world. And so but the interesting thing with the Samatha side is that it's almost a teaching that comes after quite a profound into jhana, however you want to call it, quite a profound development of a being, and then what comes as a sort of final balance. And it struck me that a bit in terms of what people were saying, but if you think of the arupa jhanas, the first two give you kind of going to the end of the world, kind of infinite boundlessness, and then the second two, I don't know where you go, but there isn't an outside. And so there's something about that. It's a very interesting sutta in that it doesn't talk about those things, but in another sense, yet it's always within the body, because we've got nothing else apart from our sensation. There's nothing else with which to experience anything. So I just thought it was very interesting that way, and it's almost in the whole literary structure of the sutta, as well as in the particular terms.
And it's very interesting. Yes, that quality of arupa that's there in that being. If I'd read that 40 odd years ago, that wouldn't have even come into play, because it was long before we'd been introduced to the arupa practice in that sense, but maybe there is that, even that flavor even quite early on in practice. But yes, absolutely, it's quite fascinating. This is a very particular being, and that's what I think is actually very beautiful about it, is that it does come into balance. There's a completeness. Yeah.
Hello there, Fran. I just wanted to add to that about the arupa, that just the practice really, that I found it a very powerful practice. And what came to mind were two thoughts. What came to mind was the jhana, the description in jhana of when before he goes to, is it parinibbana possibly, when he goes to fourth jhana, and then he comes out again, and then he goes back, and when it's almost a sense of making sure everything is clean and picked up and not forgotten, in the way that our Paul Dennison talks about, when you go into settling, everything goes, the whole body, every single bit of us, we don't leave anything out. And I had a very strong feeling of that in the counting, going through the counting and the following and the touching, the settling. What was interesting was also a sense of, therefore, the Four Noble Truths, that the counting was like knowing your karma, knowing every aspect of karma that's embodied in a number, but for us in the symbolism of the number. And then when coming back, it's the sort of the habits that have bound us up in that number. and then there's a kind of knowledge at the touching of the possibilities, and then in the settling of going and experiencing that. And there was very much a sense for me, I thinking, my goodness, we get to the longest of settling, whoa, where's she going to go? Is she going to go back down into Arupa and we're never going to come back again? That's it, gone. So that's, and then what was very interesting was that you brought us straight back along the longest lengths. And what came to mind very strongly for me was folk dancing. And in the past, if any of you have ever danced a farandole, all those circle dances, you know what they do. There's a leader in the farandole, and the leader carries all the people around, and they follow where the leader goes. And eventually the leader goes round and round and round in a circle, within a circle, within a circle, within a circle, within. At a certain point, the leader finishes the dance, cuts straight through and goes out. So in a sense, as I'm saying it, it strikes me that there's the possibilities of both, that in the sense that both those two worlds, and the way Diana was talking about, that you can take it back to the world and attain liberation that way, or you can take it inwardly, you can take it outwardly or inwardly. And when you go to if there's experience of your way is fourth rupa within practice kind of thing, there's a kind of interesting, just a very moving, evocative experience for me as you were talking about that. And it was really fantastic, actually. So very scary, actually. So I've had a lot of recent, very sort of moving experiences for me that made it so. So it wouldn't normally, perhaps, if it had been a year ago, I probably wouldn't have experienced it for me in that way. But very timely and interesting. Yes, great.
Carries lots and lots of resonances. I think that's that quality of the Dharma, yeah, that resonates.
Yeah. Yes. Okay. Yeah. Great.
Okay, Rachel.
Bringing it right back down to earth in a way. It's also struck me that it's a really central way of experiencing just everyday life, and particularly interaction with people. The sense that all the stories I tell myself about what's going on out there, about this person, this situation, and therefore I'm reacting in this way, are also all within this Fathom Long Body that's here. And when I get caught up and entangled in my stories, it's because I've forgotten that.
Mm.
And but there is also it doesn't then lead to a sense of solipsism of therefore I am the only being that exists, because there is also all this stuff coming in that is not in my control from other people, that is impacting on what's going on within this Fathom Long Body. So in a way, it's what somebody earlier in this discussion, I think it was Sarah, was saying about how, or maybe even you, Fran, about how we are not in control of this body. It has just arisen, the physical body, but similarly, what the body contains in terms of thoughts and perceptions is also not within our control. So there's this constant flow inwards and outwards, but having that sense of being centered in the physical body, within the Fathom Long Body in interaction and in our lives generally, can be hugely helpful.
Mm. Yeah, I mean, we've done it in the context of a sort of sitting practice, but you know, it's anywhere that could come to mind, be brought to mind. Yeah, and actually walking is a really good instance of it. Yeah. Where are our boundaries when we're walking? How do we anything that helps give us that taste, a taste of something that is in the middle. It isn't me and it isn't there. Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. I would like to ask if someone would like to chant for us all the transference of merit, please. That's short. Great. Thank you. Thank you, Sarah. Yeah, excellent. So that if anyone would, it's on page 6. So this is a wish for all beings, including the Devas, the bright Deva, we're just in the company of, and other beings to bring joy and good fortune to ourselves through the merit of us meeting. Yeah, great. Thank you.
Tawata Chamhe
Hey,
Sampadang
Samgatang Punya Sampadang
Sabbe
Sabbe Dewana
Modantu
Modantu
Sabba
Sabba Sampati
Sampati
Siddhiya
Etawata
Tavata Chakam
Chamhe
Hey
Sampadang
Sangatang
Sampadang
Sampadang
Sabbe
Sabbe Satana
Modantu
Modantu
Sabba
Sabba Sampati Siddhiya
Etawata
Tavata Chakam Hey
Sampadang
Sangatang Punya Sampadang
Sabbe
Sabbe Bhutana Modantu
Sabba
Sabba Sampati Siddhiya
Idang me nyatina
Hatinang Hotu
Sukita
Saketa Hontu Sapneyo
Sadhu
Sadhu
Sadhu.
Sadhu
Sadhu.
Sadhu.
That was very interesting.
Yeah.
What we had there, absolutely kind of appropriate. Peter, you weren't muted, so we had a female and a male voice. Very, very.
In harmony.
Yes.
Right. A way I've got into doing that, which I find quite helpful, when you're doing the Devas, you think of the Devas. The Satta, let's think of humans and animals. And then the Bhutas are kind of lower beings. So you've got a sphere. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, thank you. I think that was a lovely way to end what's been a remarkable series. I think.